Welcome everyone today to our webcast, Secrets of Selecting Objects in AutoCAD and AutoCAD-based software. We have Michelle Rasmussen with us today, live and in direct here, in person, so we welcome Michelle, and I will pass things over to you.
Great, thank you, Corinne. So welcome everyone. We are going to be talking about some commands today that are in all of the AutoCAD products. So whether you're using AutoCAD Map 3D, AutoCAD, AutoCAD Civil 3D, maybe Advanced Steel, these commands you can actually use across the board in any AutoCAD-based product. And so let's just go ahead and start off. I do want to make sure that all of you have your chat windows open, because we're going to be using the chat quite a bit today. I think that it's important to make these a little bit more interactive so that you take more home and you actually retain a lot more information than just sitting here watching me. And hopefully I'm not putting you to sleep. But at least by using the chat window to do some polling and make you type some answers in, hopefully that'll keep everyone awake and make it a little bit more fun for you today. So let's start off with a question. When you are working in AutoCAD, when do you need to select objects? So this is where you're going to type into the chat window, and you can send it to all participants so that everyone can see what your answers are. So Hector says all the time. Good. But specifically, when do you select them? Are you in the middle of a command? Are you drawing? Are you erasing? What are you doing when you're actually selecting the objects? So Hector might be the only one chatting with me today. Okay, that's all right. Okay, so Steve says when making changes to objects, good. All right, now, yeah, exactly. So when we are in an editing command, and it doesn't matter which editing command you're in, it can be the move, it can be the copy, it can be stretch or rotate, array, any of those commands all need you to select the objects. And when you go to, when you start one of those editing commands, the first thing it's going to do is ask you to select those objects. And what happens to your crosshair? Well, that crosshair changes to a small box. And when you start selecting the objects, they highlight in a blue color. So what if you're not in the middle of a command, though? What happens then? Then you get into grips, right? The objects are highlighted blue, and they have grips on them. And I love grips. I use them quite frequently. I'll oftentimes select objects before I'm in a command and then use those grips to do some advanced editing. And Chapter 5 of our AutoCAD Fundamentals book actually covers those advanced editing commands with the grips. And so it's a great way to figure out how to use those. But you can do things like move the objects using base points, copy, rotate, reference other points to do references, all kinds of things with those grips. So now you know when you are selecting objects, but when you go to select objects, how do you currently do it? So tell me in the chat window, if you will, how are you currently selecting your objects? Are you using the pick box to pick each and every item that you want to select, one item at a time? So Hector says he clicks on them. Okay, so that would be clicking on using the pick box. Good. Are there other ways that you use? Okay, so Jan says that she picks one, right-clicks, and says select similar. Sometimes select all the objects, so you must type all in there, right? Okay. Oh, so Hector, it sounds like you click and drag around them, so it sounds like you're using the lasso command. We're going to cover that today if no one else is familiar with lasso. Excellent. All right. So what we're going to cover today is we're going to talk a little bit about selecting objects with the click or shift click. And what does it mean to you when you use shift click? What happens to the objects when you do a shift click? Does anyone know? Go ahead and type that in the chat window for me. Okay, so Jan doesn't know what it does. That's not a problem. A lot of people don't actually realize that when you use shift and you click on an object, it allows you to unselect that object. So let's say you select a bunch of different objects and then you realize, oh, shoot, I shouldn't have selected that one over there in the corner, you can use the Shift key and then click on that object, and it will deselect it from your selection set. So that's a really handy command when you're selecting a lot of objects. All right, some of you might be used to using windows or crossing windows. Now, what's the difference between those? Does anyone know the difference? Hector says it selects multiple items. Yes, they both select multiple items all at once. The biggest difference, though, is the way that you use them. Oh, it looks like I didn't have the, we'll actually come into that. But we've got polygons and crossing polygons as well. We can use lasso, which it sounds like a few of you are. There's fence commands within the selection group, and there's previous and last. I don't know if any of you use those. Those are really handy. I use them quite frequently, actually, and we'll get into those. Selection groups. I love selection groups. It almost acts like a block, but they don't have to be a block to use them. And then selection cycling is very handy. We'll talk a little bit about that. So Norman says fence is great. Thank you, Norman. How many of you actually use Quick Select? Have any of you used that? I personally love Quick Select. It's a great way to select just the items that you need, maybe on a specific layer or you know, any that are a specific diameter, circles and stuff like that that are specific diameter. There's all kinds of ways to use Quick Select. So I'm going to show you Quick Select today. And then we actually had someone that mentioned that they use the Select Similar. So those are all the topics that we're going to be covering today. Let's jump into window selection. And this comes to you from our AutoCAD Fundamentals in Chapter 5. When you're working with windows, what you're going to do is when it tells you to select objects, you're going to pick a point, let your mouse go, move the mouse, and then move the mouse over to the right, and then you're going to pick another point. And what that does is it selects only those objects that are 100% inside of that window. So you can see on my screen there, even though that blue selection box is touching some of those trees on the top line and then that tree on the far right-hand side, it's only selecting those that are 100% inside. Now the crossing window is similar, except you go the opposite direction. You pick on the right-hand side, you move your mouse to the left, and then anything that is crossing that area is going to be selected. So in the case where it's a green crossing window, it's going to select everything that touches or is 100% inside of that box. So that's the difference between windows and crossing selections. We also have the option of lasso. Now, the new users have found this command very easily because their natural instinct is to actually left-click and drag their window selection. And what happens when you left-click and drag? Well, it's going to create this lasso around the items. Now, if you left-click and drag to the right, it's going to be a window lasso. That means it has to be 100% inside. So anytime you see blue, it means you have to be 100% inside of that selection window to be able to select it. If it's green, you're picking a point and going to the left, that's a crossing, and so it just has to be touching that green area somewhere, okay? So let's actually take a look at this and see how it's done. I'm going to go over into my software, and if I start a command, I'll just start the copy command. If I left-click, I've let my mouse go. Now I'm going to move my mouse. I want to make sure that's clear because I'm not holding my left mouse button down. I've actually clicked and let it go, and now I'm moving it. So you can see as I move that, even though it's touching that tub when I'm selecting those walls, it's not actually selecting it until I get that tub 100% inside of that window. So again, when it's blue, it's 100% inside, and then it will be selected. If I go the opposite direction, as soon as I touch it, see the difference there? It's going to go ahead and select it. So we definitely want to understand the difference between blue and green. Blue, 100% inside, green just has to touch, okay? But when I do the same command again, and this time I'm going to left click, hold my mouse button down, and since I went to the left slightly first, guess what? I got a green crossing window or crossing lasso. So anything that I touch with that lasso immediately gets selected, right? Do that again. This time I'll left click and start dragging to the right, and you'll notice it's only going to select those things that are 100% inside, and so it won't select that tub until I get those circles all the way inside of that lasso. So the lasso is great because it allows you to free-form selections. Be careful with the lasso. You can see I've gone a little bit crazy with it, and when you go back over an area you've already selected, it's deselecting it. So you definitely want to be cognizant of that so that you don't accidentally just grab areas and then deselect those same areas, okay? So those are our crossing windows, our windows and our lasso. Do you have any questions on that? If you do, definitely, let us know in the chat window. They're pretty self-explanatory, I think. Most people are already using those. Now, what if you don't like the lasso? In the options dialog box, which I'm showing right here, the way I got to this is I just right-clicked in a blank space of my drawing area, and I told it to, I right-clicked and I went and clicked on Options. And this brings up the Options dialog box. And then there's a Selection tab. And that Selection tab is really great because, first off, you can change the pick box size. So remember how your cursor changes shape? It goes from a crosshair to a little box. Well, you can set how big you want that box. Not only that, but you can actually set the size of the grips. Remember when you select an item and you're not in the middle of a command, and so it'll give you grips? Well, you can set the size of those grips right here in the selection dialog box. So this is very handy to make sure things are the size you need it. For me, I'm farsighted, so I keep my pick box very, very small because I can see it just fine. Someone else that might be nearsighted may need that pick box to be a little bit bigger, and so that's going to be different on every machine, and you can set the machine up for the user that's using it. The other thing is, remember I said that the shift click will deselect items. Well, you can change that. If you want to actually shift to add items to your selection set, then you can tell it that right here in the selection modes by putting a checkbox next to the use shift to add to selection, because by default it's going to remove it from the selection, okay? Next thing is, if you don't like the lasso command, if it's just annoying to you, you can come in here and turn off the implied window. And you don't want to turn off the implied window. If you like to be able to do a crossing window, or just basically the rectangular shape, you can go ahead and leave that implied window on, but just take off the allow, press, and drag for lasso. That way you can get rid of it, it's no longer a problem, and you don't accidentally click and start dragging and accidentally select things. Last but not least, what if you're colorblind? What if you can't see that color blue when it highlights your items? Well, you can change that selection color down below. With the selection effect color, you can go ahead and use the drop-down box to go ahead and modify that. So let's talk a little bit about what the difference is between these commands. Now, how many of you have used the stretch command before? Go ahead and tell me yes. Just type yes in the chat panel if you've used stretch before. Okay, so we're getting a lot of yeses. Good. The difference with the stretch command is you can only use a crossing window for that stretch command, right? So it has to know what items it can stretch. If the item falls 100% inside of that stretch window, it gets moved. But anything that crosses that stretch window actually gets stretched. So definitely understand the difference there. So let me actually go over into the software, and maybe I want to make this house a little bit bigger. So I'm going to stretch this wall so that these bedrooms are larger, the family room is larger, okay? So I'm going to start my stretch command right up here on the modify panel. And if I'm doing a stretch command, I said it has to be a crossing, right? So what direction am I going to start? Am I going to start over here on the right? Type yes or no. No. Okay, good. Thanks, Jan. I'm going to start over here. I wasn't starting on the left. I'm starting over here on the right. I'm going to start on the right and draw my crossing window to the left. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and grab that. I'm going to tell it I'm done selecting objects by hitting enter, and then I'll left click and drag. And it looks like my window was a block, so it's not actually allowing me to take that window. So you need to be cognizant of those things. Okay, so the blocks, you have to have them 100% inside to allow it to take that. But what if, let me go Control Z that. What if I just wanted to stretch this room, you know, from this corner right here of the window and this part of the room over here? Am I going to be able to do a crossing window that works for that? Let me start the stretch command again. Oops, I started styles. Let me just do it with the button here. So if I come in here and I do this, what's happening? It's not selecting all the objects that I want. In fact, it's selecting too many objects. Well, that's where the polygon option comes in. So rather than doing a window, if I do CP at the command line, that stands for crossing poly, it's going to invoke a crossing polygon, and then I can set that shape, any shape I want. So I'm going to type CP, and I'll pick a point right here. I'll come in, pick a point there. I don't want to grab the text, so I'll pick a point above that. But I will grab the text of the kitchen. That's probably good. And that looks pretty good right there. And grab that point. When I'm done, I hit the Enter key. And you can see it's allowed me to select only the objects that I want. Now I'll hit the Enter to tell it I'm done selecting and drag my lines over. So isn't that much easier than having to do this manually by moving those walls and extending this out? You know, you can make things a lot easier by understanding all the different ways that you can select. Okay? So that allowed me to go ahead and make my house a little bit bigger, just in the rooms that I wanted. Okay. What about trimming and extending? Now, this is where, you know, there's 1,000 different ways to do the trim and extend. If you have a ton of different objects, though, that you want to trim all at once or extend all at once, it makes it easy to, you know, use some of these commands we're talking about, whether it's a crossing window or a lasso or whatever. You can select all those objects that you want to extend or trim all at once, and boom, it's a lot faster. Now, how would you handle what I'm showing on my screen right here? What command might you use to select those objects? And go ahead and type in which command you would use in the chat panel, if you will, please. So this is actually something, when I worked for Reevely Engineering, I did a lot of structural detailing for them, and we would have all these beams or floor joists or, you know, different things that would span the whole area. And if we had a rounded wall or something where I wanted to just trim them off, then, you know, I'd have to go and click each one individually until they came out with, of course, the fence command and being able to trim a lot of things at once. Basically, I could take that using the fence command. Thank you, Norman. Norman actually got it. He listed that he would use a fence on this. I could actually use the fence command to trim up those beams going across the courtyard. Maybe it's a pergola or something like that over the courtyard, but I don't want it to go over the fountain. So using the fence allows me to do that. Let me show you what happens when we use a fence. The fence only selects items that it touches. So basically, I would start the trim command, hit the Enter key to have every object in the drawing a cutting edge. Then I would draw this fence in here about like this. And that will trim up those objects just like that. The only difference is it would have objects in the middle of that fountain if I selected everything. And so I might want to just grab specific trim edges if that's the case, okay? So let's actually go over into the software. I'll show you how I make that happen. Now, I'm going to turn on my beams layer because I do have my beams already pre-drawn, okay? I'll zoom in so it's easier to see for you. Now, I want to do the trim command. So I'm going to start the trim command, and it's asking me what objects I want to use as a trim edge. I'm lazy, so I'm just going to hit the Enter key to select everything in my model as a trim edge. Next thing you see that you have at the bottom, the fence, the crossing edge, you know, all these different options. I am going to type F for fence and hit Enter. Now I can go in and draw my fence lines, and as I go, look at that. Isn't that nice? It's giving me a little preview of what it's actually cutting. So it's no problem if I come over it twice. It's not going to untrim that side of it, but I can see very clearly where I need to end. When I'm done picking all the points for my fence, I simply hit the Enter key. And because I selected all of the objects, of course, I've got these items in the middle over top of my fountain. No problem. That's easy to go back in and erase, you know, very quickly and easily. So isn't that much easier, though, than going in and drawing a line from this end to this end and drawing it again over and over just to get that odd shape? What do you think? Will that make your job easier using that command? Go ahead and type yes or no in the chat panel. All right, Steve says yes. Hector says yes. Excellent. All right, let me go ahead and go back over into our slides here. Excellent. Now, the next thing I want to show you is the selection group. Now, why do we need a selection group? It's a really nice way to be able to select objects. In fact, I love blocks because you're able to grab a bunch of different things all at once and group them together. But let's say you're using a table block for the dining room table, and then you're using a chair block for the chairs, but you want, when you move that table and chair set, you want to grab all of the tables and the table and all of the chairs around it to move together. Well, you can, excuse me, you can go ahead and group those items together without having to create yet another block that then you would explode if you wanted to move just one chair or another, right? So where you do that is on the Home tab in the Group panel, and you can see here are all the commands. You can ungroup items, basically, you know, almost like exploding a block. You can edit items to add or remove items from the group. And you can turn the selection group on or off so that sometimes you can have the groups turned on so that when you pick an item in the drawing, if it's part of a selection group, it will select the entire group. If you turn it off, then that item will act as itself, just selecting one item at a time. So let's actually go into the software, and I will show you how to create that group. So you can see I've got these polylines that are acting as my fountain. I want that to act as a group, and so what I'm going to do is on the Home tab, it looks like my screen is too small, so my Groups panel is actually reducing itself to fit in the screen. But when I hover over it, you can see all the commands that I had. If I go ahead and click on Create Group, it creates a group of objects, and I'm just going to use my crossing window to select that and hit the Enter key. Now, the next time I need to do something, let's say I want to move my fountain, I don't have to grab each and every one, but you can see what's happened here. My groups are not turned on, so it's actually having me grab each polyline by itself. Oops, you know what I didn't do? That was actually my fault. I did not name that group, but let's see if it'll select it anyway. Let's see. I'm going to turn the groups on. Yep, even though I didn't name it, it still made it a group. But you can name these groups to make it easy to find them, and then you can actually manage your groups as well. And looks like I've only got one group that's named, which was my master bath. So you can see how easy it is to make that group. I actually made a group over here for my master bath so that if I decide to move that master bath out a little bit, it's not a problem. It'll take that entire group and move it. So even if I started the stretch command at this point, that group is not going to act like a group, but if I do the move command and I pick that, you can see it has grabbed everything in the group. So it's going to vary according to which command you're in, but the nice thing is you just grab one of those. If I don't want to grab the entire group, I go back up to the group panel and turn it off, okay? Or let's say I want to modify the group. I can go ahead and click on the plus minus option here to edit the group, and I'll select the group to edit, and then I can say, well, I want to remove this bit of information from my group. Not a problem. It went ahead and removed it. And maybe I want to remove that piece as well. So now I hit the Enter key. Next time I go to select it, it's not going to include my water closet or my sink over on this wall. It will include everything else. So what do you think? Do you think the group selection, go ahead and type in your chat panel for me. Let me know if the group selection is something that you would actually use. Okay, so I'm seeing from Norman, he uses Civil 3D, and he has to use the classic group command rather than a group command because it's not available. You can try typing group into the command line and see if that works because it should still be available in the software. So Hector says, yes, this is going to be very helpful for him. Steve says, not very often, but could be useful. Good. Excellent. All right. Now, when you're selecting objects, how do you currently handle overlapping objects? So for instance, you know, right now I have a wall and my shower rectangle is actually sitting on top of my wall. How would I go about selecting that wall? Well, one thing I could do is I could actually come down and select the wall below the shower, right? But what about over here on the other side? What would I do if I wanted to select the wall instead of the sink rectangle? So type in the chat box for me and tell me what you would do to handle this. To make sure that you grab this. Okay, so Jan is saying she uses the selection cycling. Excellent. You know, the old-fashioned way to handle this was, before selection cycling became available, was to actually change the draw order. What a pain in the butt that was, wasn't it? I mean, you had to go in and start the change order command and select the object that you want on top or bottom. Yeah, the draw order, exactly. And so, you know, and then once you had it in the right order, then you could go into the command and be able to use that. But it's much easier if you use selection cycling. So let's talk a little bit about what selection cycling is. When you are in the status bar, first thing you need to do is understand where to find that selection cycling. It is a tool, and I pointed it out right there on the status bar. If that's not showing up, of course, you have to go over on the right and customize the status bar and just put a check mark next to it. But when it's on, what's going to happen is it's going to allow you to use either a dialog box or use the tab key to change the selection, okay? So let me go over into the software again. And let's see. I'm going to change things here. There we go. Okay, so this office has a lot more things on top of each other, right? So we may want to, I'm going to zoom out quite a bit too so that you can't tell exactly what I'm actually selecting. So I'm going to start the move command, and you can see down here on my status bar, my selection cycling is turned on. So that means if I select items that are on top of each other, it's going to come up and pick a dialog box. So now it's asking me, do you want to select the line that's right there, the arc, or the other one of the other lines? If I go ahead and select the arc, I'll zoom in, it went ahead and selected the arc. let me zoom out again, and I'll grab some other things. And it's saying, well, wait a minute. Do you want to select the circle or the text? Because both of those are within the parameters of the selection set or the selection box, right? Because I was zoomed out so much. So that's really nice to be able to have that. If I come down here and let's say I put my cursor right here, if I use the, whoops, try that again. There we go. If I use Shift Space, what it's doing right now is it's toggling between the options that are there. So rather than clicking on one of them and then having the dialog box come up, I can use the Shift key and press the Space key at the same time, and it will allow me to pick between them visually to be able to select the correct line. So now that I see that one is highlighted, I go ahead and pick it. I say, yep, that's the one, and it picked the correct line. So what do you think? Do you think that selection cycling is something that you'll use now? A yes or a no in the command or the chat panel. All right, so yep, Hector says yes, Steve says yes. Excellent. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about the quick select. Quick select is an amazing command. I don't know how I got by without it before I ever found this. It allows you to use properties to select the objects. So whether it be the radius of a circle or an arc, or maybe it's the layer that you want it to be on, or you can even select all. You have these different options. And the way that you get to that is you can type QSelect at the command line, or let's go over into the software. If you go to the Home tab Utilities panel, you'll be able to get there. So right now I'm on the Home tab. My Utilities panel is kind of hidden a little bit. So I'm just going to expand that and, whoops, go slower here. There we go. There's our Quick Select command right there. And so if I click on that, it's going to bring up a little dialog box, and it says, well, what do you want to apply this to? Do I want to apply it to the entire drawing, or if I had a selection already created, do I want to apply it just to the current selection so I can narrow down what I have selected? And what object types do I want to have it conform to? Do I just want circles? If I just have circles, you'll notice I can actually come in and tell it the radius or the diameter, maybe my layer that I'm working with. And when I select something like this, the operator is going to change. It's either going to be equal or not equal. Do I want everything on a certain layer or everything that's not on that layer? And then the value, I can use the drop-down box to actually select one of the values. So let's see if, yeah, I have some circles in my fountain. So I'm going to go ahead and choose my fountain. And I'm going to have it include it in a new selection set. Now, if I already had the object selected and I said I was only applying it to the selection set up here, I can tell it to exclude it from a new selection set, right? So I'm going to click OK. And you can see what it did is it found circles that were on the layer fountain, right? So I may have put that on the wrong layer. That's okay. I can now go and change that if I need to. But you can see how easy it is to do that. The other thing I can do, give me 1 second, let me get a drink. Okay. So if I select this, I'm going to go and look at the quick properties here. My radius is 1 foot. Okay. Now, I want to see how many other circles I have in my drawing that are 1 foot. So I'm going to go up to the utilities and do a quick select. And I'm going to tell it to only do it with circles. So now I can tell it, let's see, was my radius 1 foot? I think it was. We'll try this. We'll say equals to 1 foot and click OK. Okay, so that's the only circle right there that is 1 foot. What if I want to grab all of those circles that are less than 1 foot or equal to or less than? Well, not a problem. I can come back in again and say I want to do this to circles. And rather than equal to, I can say it's not equal to, greater than, or less than. And so I'll come in and say less than. I'll click OK. Whoops, I forgot to put a value in there. Sorry. Try that. Whoops. I'm getting click happy. All right, now I'm going to click on that. Let's try that one more time. I'll do a circle, and my radius is less than, I'll say less than 2 feet this time, and I'll click OK. Now it grabbed all of those circles that are less than 2 feet in radius. So it makes it very easy to go and grab just the items that you want according to one or the other of the properties. Now, how many of you have already used that before? Go ahead and type a yes in there. Okay, great. Brian says it's useful, it's great, with exclamation marks. He's excited about that one. So great. So some of you are saying no, but Jan says it looks awesome, so good. So now you've learned something new today. I'm glad to see that. All right. Before I get into this, I'm going to go show you the last 2 commands that I haven't talked about, and that is the previous and the last, okay? Now, I've selected a bunch of items. I'm going to type move here so that you can see what I can do. I'm going to put in 20 feet, or 20, just really quick. Okay. So I've moved things, but I accidentally moved them the wrong distance, okay? If I start the move command again, I can type P for previous and hit enter, and you can see it selected the last items that I previously had selected. So the previous, it means the previous selected items. So keep that in mind, and then when I hit enter, I can go ahead and move that back the 20 units, and boom, they're right back where they were. But when I, let me draw a circle here. Okay. When I do the move command this time, and this time I'm going to type L for last, what it's going to do, how many think it's going to grab the last items I had selected? Just put a yes in your chat box for me. Okay, so Jan says yes. Steve says yes. Actually, last is going to be the last item you drew. So it will only select one item, okay? But that's really handy because if you know that you need to create something, and let's say I've got it jumbled over top of a bunch of other things, and I don't want to have to go in and pick it, but I definitely need to do something with it. Maybe I'm doing a 3D model, and I need to extrude that circle. Well, I can go ahead and type L for last to grab the last item I drew. So that's the difference between previous and last. Previous is the previous selected items. Last is the last item drawn. Okay. Well, what do you think about those? Do you think you'll use those today? I actually use previous quite often. So, all right. Well, what questions do you guys have for me? I know, we're a little bit longer than I expected. We're about 54 minutes in. Actually, it's not bad. So that took about 40 minutes. But do you have any questions on any of those selection commands that I covered today? Let's go ahead and open it up to questions and answers. Nobody?
Michelle, it's Karine here. You had a few things come through. Actually, a lot of people responded in the Q&A part rather than the chat window, just so you know. But I didn't want to interrupt because you had enough responses, it seemed like, in the chat window as well. Okay. We did have a question come in earlier. Again, I'm not sure, though. It was obviously pretty specific to what you were doing.
Okay.
So I'm just looking at it now, and I can read it, but I'm not sure if it'll make sense because it was about 13 minutes into from the beginning of the presentation, where they asked if there was an option to use one or the other by holding down another key. They said using window or lasso whenever we choose.
Ooh, that is actually a really good question, and I'm going to have to answer that in the blog article that I write after this because I don't know the answer. So I'm going to have to research that for you.
Okay. And someone did ask just recently, can quick select target custom attributes?
Can quick select target custom attributes? Let's take a look at that. Trying to see if I have any custom attributes in one of these. I would bet that I have one. let's look at this. Bring my properties up. Oh, I don't have custom attributes in that. You know, I wouldn't be able to check that unless I knew of one of the blocks that had some custom attributes. But I want to say most likely, but again, I'll probably have to answer that in the blog article because I wouldn't be able to test it unless I had custom attributes in the drawing. So let me create some on another drawing after this, and I'll answer that question in the blog. Great question.
Okay. Well, yep, they said thank you. Wendy's asking if you can demonstrate select similar.
Oh, yes, I forgot about that one. Great option. Okay, so select similar is amazing. It's used quite often inside of advanced steel because advanced steel objects are very complex. You know, you might have a joint and a beam that all connect together, and like in the joint you'd have a bunch of bolts and plates and different things that join those beams and columns and things together. And so when you select something, so let's say I select this toilet, okay, that's a block. If I right-click and go down to select similar, it will grab all of the blocks in my file that are a toilet. And it doesn't have to be blocks. I can select text as well, or lines, or arcs, or curves. So when I select, oops, that's a group. Let's find one that's not a group. There we go. If I select this piece of text here, I right-click and tell it to select similar. It's going to find all of the text in my file that have the similar attributes to that. So great question. Sorry that I forgot to show you that one. Others that you might see? Let's see.
I don't see any others here in the Q&A section. I can check the chat window.
Okay, so I see one that just came in from PJ. He says, using the trim command, could I have chosen the curved lines around the fountain to trim the beams? So yeah, instead of selecting everything in my model, if I would have come in here and not been lazy like I usually am and selected each one of these curves for the cutting edge, then it would not have left those lines in the fountain. So absolutely, PJ, that's correct. All right, so it looks like, so Norman is asking, it looks like pressing the space bar while using lasso toggles between crossing and window. Okay, so I did not know that. Thank you, Norman, for pointing that out. So the space bar is helpful to toggle back and forth between crossing and window with lasso. And Casey is saying, I have tried to Q-select attributes and have inquired but was not available. Okay, so it looks like Casey's tried this for us, and it is not available with attributes. And Steve says, select similar is great. Wish I could have known about that before. Yeah, it's very, very handy. All of them are. Excellent. All right.
And
well,
if you think of questions, just to let people know, if they do think of questions afterwards, they can always send them to the feedback@ascented.com email address that we might put up after. And Michelle will be putting together a blog with Q&A. So if you think of something, you know, send it to her today or tomorrow, and perhaps you can include that in the blog as well.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
And just to quickly go over this slide here, so normally these webcasts cover certain topics or a chapter within a book, and obviously this was a little bit different because it's covered in many different books. So ASCENT is an Autodesk authorized publisher. So we don't just have printed books though, we have ebooks, we have video enhanced ebooks, you can have e-learning bundles, you learn online. There's also instructor tools for people who are teaching the class and want kind of an extra, bit of help so you get the answers to the questions, some timing suggestions, and some of the books also have overheads, so PowerPoints for you as well. And then if you're looking for really, large quantities of books for a school or your organization, you can purchase them through digital site licenses that we give you basically the files where you can go off and print the books yourself. So there's lots of options here, which is what we just wanted to highlight and show for you. And do you have one more slide there for us with the contact?
Yeah.
There we go. Perfect. So our website, our e-store. You can purchase all of our products on the AscentEstore.com. We also have a lot of them available on Amazon, especially if you're in the U.S. and you're an Amazon Prime member. I think the free shipping applies for all of our products. Our phone number is there, and again, if you have any questions or think of additional questions for Michelle, feedback at AscentEd.com is great. And if you have other topics you'd like Michelle to cover or any of our other authors for webcasts, we would love to hear them. We're always looking to see what it is that you'd like to know about. We've got a whole team of very knowledgeable people here who are happy to do these for